What if the greatest mistake you are making is believing that distance means a lack of love? What if the one who feels the deepest connection is the very one choosing to stay away? Today, you will discover a psychological truth Carl Jung understood long ago. Sometimes people withdraw not because they feel nothing, but because they feel far too much. And by the end of this video, you will understand the hidden battle that causes deep affection to turn into silence. Have you ever felt a connection so powerful that it seemed impossible to explain? A bond that appeared real, yet somehow remained out of reach? If so, stay with me. What you are about to hear may completely change how you interpret distance, silence, and emotional withdrawal. And if this message resonates with your experience, leave a comment saying, "I understand the silence." It helps this conversation reach others who need it. If this insight is helping you see relationships from a completely different perspective, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts below. Your support allows us to continue exploring the deeper psychological truths hidden beneath everyday experiences. What if the greatest misunderstanding in human relationships is the belief that distance automatically means the absence of love? Most people interpret withdrawal as a sign that feelings have faded or never existed in the first place. Yet Carl Jung's understanding of the human psyche suggests something far more complex. The deeper an emotional connection becomes, the more it has the power to awaken hidden parts of the personality that have remained buried for years. These hidden parts are not always pleasant. They include fears, insecurities, painful memories, and unresolved emotional wounds that an individual may have spent a lifetime avoiding. When a meaningful connection enters someone's life, it does more than create affection. It acts like a mirror. Suddenly, qualities, desires, and vulnerabilities that were once hidden become visible. A person who appeared confident may discover deep fears of rejection. Someone who seemed emotionally independent may realize how much they long for connection. These discoveries can be unsettling because they challenge the image people have created about themselves. The connection forces them to confront truths they would rather keep hidden. The unconscious mind often reacts to this discomfort in surprising ways. Instead of moving toward the source of emotional significance, it seeks safety through distance. This reaction is rarely planned or fully understood by the individual. On the surface, they may believe they simply need space or time. Beneath the surface, however, the psyche is attempting to protect itself from emotions that feel overwhelming. The stronger the feelings become, the greater the fear of losing control, being hurt, or exposing parts of themselves they have never shared with anyone. Jung believed that every person carries a shadow, the collection of traits, emotions, and experiences they reject or deny. Deep connections have a remarkable ability to bring this shadow into awareness. The presence of someone important can trigger old wounds from childhood, memories of betrayal, fears of abandonment, or feelings of unworthiness. Rather than facing these painful realities directly, many individuals unconsciously create distance. The withdrawal is not necessarily a statement about the other person. It is often a reflection of an inner struggle that has suddenly become impossible to ignore. This is why behavior can appear contradictory. A person may care deeply, think constantly about the connection, and still choose silence. The conflict between desire and fear creates emotional tension that they do not know how to resolve. Their heart moves toward closeness, while their unconscious defenses pull them away, leaving them caught between longing and self-protection. One of the most difficult truths to understand is that genuine emotional intensity can create fear just as easily as it creates attraction. Most people assume that when someone experiences a powerful connection, the natural response is to move closer. Yet the human psyche is rarely that simple. According to Jungian thought, every meaningful encounter has the potential to awaken forces within the unconscious mind. These forces often remain hidden during ordinary interactions, but when a connection touches the deepest layers of the soul, they emerge with unexpected strength. A person may spend years building emotional defenses without even realizing it. These defenses are created through experiences of disappointment, rejection, loss, betrayal, or emotional neglect. Over time, they become part of the personality. They help the individual feel safe and maintain a sense of control. Then a significant connection appears, and suddenly those defenses begin to crack. Feelings arise that cannot be easily managed or explained. The certainty that once existed starts to disappear. For many people, this experience is both beautiful and terrifying. On one hand, they feel understood in ways they have never experienced before. They sense a rare emotional resonance that reaches beyond ordinary attraction. On the other hand, they become aware of how much they could lose. The possibility of closeness creates the possibility of pain. The possibility of trust creates the possibility of disappointment. The more meaningful the connection becomes, the more vulnerable they feel. Jung often spoke about the tension between the conscious and unconscious aspects of the self. The conscious mind may desire intimacy and connection, while the unconscious mind remains attached to old patterns of protection. This internal conflict creates confusion. The individual may not fully understand why they are pulling away. They may even become frustrated with their own behavior. One part of them longs to move forward, while another part desperately seeks safety in retreat. This struggle becomes even more intense when the connection challenges a person's established identity. Someone who has always viewed themselves as independent may suddenly discover a deep need for emotional closeness. Someone who prides themselves on emotional control may encounter feelings that cannot be neatly organized or suppressed. These experiences shake the foundations of the self-image they have carefully constructed over many years. Distance can become a way of restoring balance when emotions feel overwhelming. The individual steps back, hoping to regain clarity and control over what is happening inside. Yet emotional significance does not disappear simply because physical or emotional space is created. The connection continues to exist within the psyche, influencing thoughts, dreams, reflections, and feelings long after the distance begins. Carl Jung believed that some of the most important experiences in life do not merely affect our emotions, they transform our inner world. When a person encounters someone who awakens deep feelings, the experience often reaches beyond attraction and enters the realm of psychological change. This is where many people become uncomfortable. They may believe they are reacting to another person, but in reality, they are also reacting to the transformation taking place within themselves. Human beings naturally seek stability. The mind prefers familiar patterns because they create a sense of safety. Even when those patterns are limiting, they are predictable. A powerful emotional connection disrupts that predictability. It introduces uncertainty, possibility, and emotional depth. Suddenly, questions arise that were previously ignored. What do I truly want? What am I afraid of? Why do these feelings affect me so strongly? Why does this connection seem different from others? These questions can trigger an inner crisis. The individual begins to realize that they are no longer the same person they were before the connection appeared. Their old ways of thinking may no longer satisfy them. Their emotional defenses may feel weaker. Their carefully maintained image of themselves may begin to crack. This process can be deeply unsettling because it requires confronting aspects of the self that have remained hidden for years. Jung described personal growth as a journey toward greater self-awareness, a process he called individuation. This journey is not comfortable. It requires acknowledging fears, contradictions, weaknesses, and desires that have been pushed into the unconscious. A meaningful connection often acts as the catalyst for this process. It becomes the event that forces the individual to examine parts of themselves they would rather avoid. Because of this, withdrawal can sometimes occur during periods of intense inner change. The person is not simply dealing with emotions related to another individual. They are dealing with an entire psychological reorganization. Their values, beliefs, expectations, and emotional habits may all be shifting at the same time. What appears to be distance on the outside may actually be a period of internal struggle and reflection. Many people underestimate how frightening change can be. Even positive transformation involves loss. Old identities must be released. Familiar ways of coping must be questioned. Emotional walls that once provided protection must be lowered. These changes create uncertainty, and uncertainty often generates fear. The mind may attempt to escape this discomfort by creating space from the very connection that initiated the transformation. The paradox is that the connection remains psychologically significant precisely because it has awakened something essential. The distance does not erase the impact. Instead, the impact continues to work beneath the surface, influencing thoughts, emotions, and self-perception as the individual wrestles with the challenge of becoming someone new. One of the deepest insights in Jungian psychology is that people are often driven by forces they do not fully understand. The conscious mind likes to believe it is in control, carefully making decisions based on logic and reason. Yet beneath awareness exists a vast, unconscious world filled with emotions, memories, instincts, and hidden motivations. When someone experiences a profound emotional connection, this unconscious world becomes active in ways that can dramatically influence behavior. A person may genuinely care, feel attached, and think constantly about a connection, yet still find themselves creating distance. From the outside, this behavior appears contradictory. It seems irrational to move away from something meaningful. However, the unconscious mind is not concerned with logic. Its primary concern is protection. If a connection begins to awaken fears that have remained dormant for years, the psyche may respond by encouraging withdrawal as a way to reduce emotional intensity. Many of these fears originate long before the connection itself. Experiences from childhood, family relationships, past heartbreaks, disappointments, and emotional losses all leave psychological impressions. Even when people believe they have moved beyond these experiences, the emotional traces often remain buried beneath conscious awareness. A meaningful connection has the power to reactivate them. Feelings that seem connected to the present may actually be linked to unresolved wounds from the past. This is why some individuals become distant at the very moment closeness becomes possible. The connection begins to touch vulnerable areas of the psyche. Old fears of abandonment may surface. Concerns about rejection may become stronger. The possibility of emotional dependence may feel threatening. The individual may not consciously recognize these fears, but they experience the emotional discomfort they create. Distance then becomes a coping mechanism, an attempt to regain a sense of safety and control. Jung emphasized that what remains unconscious often controls behavior until it is brought into awareness. Someone may tell themselves they need space because they are busy, confused, or uncertain. While these explanations may contain some truth, they often fail to capture the deeper psychological reality. Beneath the surface, there may be a struggle between the desire for connection and the fear of emotional exposure. The conscious mind provides practical explanations, while the unconscious mind quietly shapes the emotional response. The stronger the connection, the more difficult this struggle can become. Meaningful relationships have a unique ability to reveal hidden aspects of the self. They expose insecurities that were previously invisible. They challenge emotional defenses that once seemed necessary. They force individuals to confront questions about trust, vulnerability, and self-worth. For someone unprepared to face these issues, stepping away may feel easier than confronting them directly, even while the emotional significance of the connection continues to grow within. One of the most subtle yet powerful dynamics in human psychology is the internal conflict that arises when desire and fear coexist in the same emotional space. Carl Jung understood this as a fundamental tension within the psyche, where opposing forces shape behavior in ways that are often confusing to both the individual and those around them. A person may feel an undeniable pull toward a meaningful connection, a sense of emotional recognition that feels rare and deeply significant, yet at the same time experience an equally strong resistance that pushes them away from it. This contradiction is not simply confusion or indecision. It is the mind attempting to manage emotional intensity that exceeds its current capacity. When feelings become too strong, the nervous system often interprets them as a form of risk. Emotional closeness begins to resemble exposure, and exposure can feel like loss of control. For someone who has built their sense of stability on independence or emotional restraint, this intensity can be destabilizing. In such moments, the psyche activates protective strategies that are not always conscious. One of these strategies is emotional distancing. The person may reduce communication, delay responses, or create physical or emotional space. Outwardly, these actions appear as detachment, but internally, They are often attempts to regulate overwhelming inner states. The connection has not necessarily weakened. Instead, it has activated internal material that the individual does not yet know how to integrate. Jung would suggest that this is where the shadow becomes active. The shadow contains aspects of the self that have been disowned or unacknowledged. A deep connection can unintentionally bring these aspects into awareness. Feelings of dependency may surface in someone who prides themselves on self-sufficiency. Fear of abandonment may arise in someone who believed they were emotionally secure. Longing may appear in someone who has always identified as detached. These contradictions create psychological friction. Rather than facing this inner conflict directly, the individual may unconsciously choose distance as a temporary relief. Space becomes a psychological buffer that allows emotions to settle, but it also prevents full engagement with the experience that triggered them. During this time, the mind continues processing the emotional impact beneath awareness. Dreams may become more vivid, thoughts may return repeatedly to the connection, and emotional impressions may deepen even in silence. What makes this process even more complex is that the person may not fully understand their own behavior. They may believe they are simply taking time or maintaining clarity, while internally they are navigating layers of emotional activation that do not yet have clear language or structure, and the tension between moving closer and pulling away continues to operate without resolution. Carl Jung's psychological framework suggests that human transformation rarely happens in comfort. It emerges in moments of inner conflict where the old self begins to dissolve, and a newer, more conscious self struggles to take form. When a deep emotional connection enters a person's life, it can act as a catalyst for this transformation. At first, it may feel like simple attraction or emotional resonance, but gradually it begins to disturb the inner structure of identity that the person has relied on for stability. The mind builds identity over time through experiences, beliefs, and emotional conditioning. People learn who they are by repeating familiar roles and responses, and this creates a sense of psychological continuity. However, a powerful connection disrupts this continuity by introducing emotional states that do not fit into the existing self-image. Suddenly, a person who thought they were emotionally independent may discover vulnerability, longing, or attachment they did not expect. This realization can feel like a loss of control over oneself. Jung would interpret this disruption as the beginning of individuation, a process where the unconscious begins to challenge the limitations of the conscious identity. During this process, the person is forced to confront parts of themselves that were previously ignored or denied. These could include unmet emotional needs, suppressed desires, or unresolved psychological conflicts. A meaningful connection often becomes the mirror that reflects these hidden aspects, making them impossible to ignore. As these inner contents rise into awareness, emotional instability can occur. The person may feel conflicted, uncertain, or even overwhelmed by their own reactions. What once felt simple now becomes complex. Feelings of closeness may be accompanied by fear. Desire may coexist with hesitation. This internal fragmentation creates pressure within the psyche, and the individual may instinctively seek relief by creating distance from the source of emotional intensity. However, this distance does not eliminate the transformation taking place internally. Instead, it often marks a temporary pause in the external expression of emotional engagement while the unconscious continues its work beneath the surface. The mind continues to process the significance of the connection, integrating new emotional insights and challenging old psychological structures. This is why, even in separation, the emotional impact remains active and persistent. From a Jungian perspective, this phase is not a failure of connection, but a necessary stage of psychological development. The retreat is not always rejection, it can be a moment where the psyche attempts to reorganize itself in response to something deeply meaningful. The tension between who the person was and who they are becoming creates an internal pressure that cannot be resolved immediately. And during this unresolved state, distance becomes a temporary expression of an ongoing inner transformation that has not yet reached completion. Carl Jung's perspective on human psychology suggests that what appears as emotional absence is often the visible surface of an invisible inner struggle. When a person encounters a connection that reaches deeply into their unconscious, it does not simply produce feelings of closeness, it activates an entire system of inner conflict, memory, and self-reflection. This is why distance, silence, or withdrawal should not always be interpreted as rejection, because the psyche does not operate in linear emotional logic but in layers of experience that often contradict each other. At the deepest level, the individual is not only responding to another person, but also responding to themselves. A meaningful connection can awaken forgotten emotional experiences, especially those related to vulnerability and dependency. These experiences are often stored in the unconscious because they were too painful or complex to fully process at the time they occurred. When they are reactivated, the emotional system can become overloaded, creating discomfort that the conscious mind struggles to explain. In this state, the person may feel a strong internal contradiction. One part of them recognizes the value and significance of the connection, while another part reacts with fear or resistance. This resistance is not necessarily directed at the other person, but at the emotional exposure that the connection demands. To be deeply connected often means to be seen, and to be seen can feel like losing the protective layers that have been built over time to maintain emotional safety. Jung would describe this as the activation of unconscious complexes, emotional patterns that shape perception and behavior without conscious awareness. These complexes can distort how the person interprets their own feelings. They may begin to question the connection, doubt their emotions, or feel uncertain about what they truly want. This confusion is not a lack of clarity, but an indication that deeper psychological material is being processed beneath awareness. During this period, withdrawal can emerge as a self-regulating mechanism. By creating space, the individual attempts to reduce emotional intensity so that they can regain internal equilibrium. However, this space does not erase the psychological impact of the connection. Instead, it allows the unconscious mind to continue processing it in a less overwhelming environment. Thoughts may persist in the background, emotions may surface unexpectedly, and internal reflection may deepen over time. What makes this process particularly significant is that it often occurs without conscious intention. The person may genuinely believe they are simply taking distance for practical reasons, yet beneath that reasoning lies a complex interplay of fear, longing, and transformation. The psyche is not rejecting the connection, it is attempting to integrate it, and until that integration is complete, the tension between closeness and distance continues to shape behavior in subtle and often misunderstood ways. Carl Jung often emphasized that the deepest movements of the soul do not follow clear conclusions, because the psyche is always in a state of becoming rather than completion. When a powerful emotional connection enters a person's life, it does not simply end in attachment or separation. It continues to work beneath awareness, shaping inner development in ways that may take time to understand. This is why even silence or distance can still carry psychological weight, because what has touched the unconscious does not easily disappear. At this stage of experience, the individual may appear distant on the surface, but internally there is often an ongoing process of integration. The emotional significance of the connection continues to exist in the background of the mind, influencing thoughts, memories, and emotional reactions. Jung would suggest that such experiences become part of the psyche's long-term structure, meaning they are not temporary feelings, but formative events that contribute to personal transformation. When a connection has reached the unconscious level, it often activates a process of reflection that extends beyond conscious control. The person may revisit memories, reevaluate beliefs about relationships, and unconsciously compare past emotional experiences with the present one. This can create a sense of internal reorganization where old psychological patterns are questioned and new emotional possibilities begin to form. However, this transformation is rarely smooth or immediate. It often involves confusion, contradiction, and emotional fluctuation. The tension between closeness and distance becomes a symbolic expression of this inner process. Closeness represents emotional truth and vulnerability, while distance represents protection and stability. The psyche moves between these two states as it attempts to find balance. Neither state is permanent because the underlying process is not about choosing one over the other, but about understanding what each reveals about the self. Jung's idea of individuation helps explain this movement. Individuation is not about becoming emotionally detached or fully merged with others. It is about becoming psychologically whole. A meaningful connection can serve as a mirror that reveals both strength and vulnerability, both desire and fear. Through this reflection, the individual begins to understand parts of themselves that were previously unconscious, and this understanding gradually reshapes their inner world. Even when physical or emotional distance remains, the psychological impact of the connection continues to evolve. The unconscious does not operate in linear time, so emotional experiences can remain active long after external interaction has stopped. This is why certain connections feel unresolved, because their meaning is still unfolding within the psyche rather than in external reality. From this perspective, distance is not the end of emotional significance, but part of a deeper psychological journey. What appears as separation may actually be transformation in progress, where the mind continues working silently to integrate what was awakened, and the meaning of the connection continues to deepen even in absence.